They blindfolded her like livestock at auction. 23 women, silent and trembling, waiting for a king they'd never see to claim one of them as his bride. But Kaela Thornridge wasn't trembling. She was calculating. Because she'd survived wolf packs in the frozen borderlands, and she knew predator behavior when she felt it. This wasn't tradition. This was a trap. And when Alpha King Ronan Varric stopped in front of her, when something impossible ignited between them like lightning in her chest, she made a choice that would shatter a kingdom. Stay until the end to see how one border survivor destroyed an empire's lies. Drop a comment with your city. Let's see where you're watching from. And if you love stories of courage against corruption, hit that like button now. The stone halls smelled of fear and expensive perfume. Kaela Thornridge stood in the third row, 20 paces from the throne, her wrists bound with ceremonial silk that cost more than her entire village had seen in a year. The blindfold pressed against her eyelids, black velvet, heavy with expectation and the weight of generations who'd worn it before her. Around her she could hear the other women breathing. Some were crying softly, others stood rigid, their terror manifesting as absolute stillness. All of them had been brought here for the same purpose, to be chosen or discarded by a man they would never see until he decided their fate. The Queen's selection. They called it sacred. They called it tradition. Kaela called it exactly what it was: control wrapped in ceremony. She'd been hauled from her home in the borderlands 3 weeks ago by royal guards, who didn't bother explaining, didn't ask permission. They'd simply appeared at dawn, read her name from a scroll, and informed her father that she'd been selected as a candidate for the Alpha King's bride. Refusal wasn't an option. Resistance meant execution, not just of her, but of her entire family. So she'd come. But she hadn't come quietly in her mind. The borderlands had taught her too much about survival to trust pretty words and ancient customs. Out there, beyond the kingdom's gleaming capital, beyond the marble halls and golden corridors, life was raw and honest. Wolves didn't pretend to be sheep, storms didn't apologize before they killed you, and predators never disguised hunger as honor. This whole spectacle reeked of predation. "He approaches," someone whispered to her left. The temperature in the hall seemed to drop. Kaela felt it, not cold, but intensity, a presence moving through the space like pressure before thunder. Heavy footsteps echoed on stone, slow and deliberate. She counted them. 12 steps from the throne, then silence as he stopped somewhere in the first row. She could hear fabric rustling as one of the women shifted nervously, then footsteps again. Moving. The other candidates had been coached by their families, trained in royal etiquette, taught to stand gracefully and speak softly, and become whatever the king wanted. Kaela had received exactly one piece of advice from her father before she left. Keep your mouth shut and your eyes down. Maybe you'll live. She'd nodded, but she'd made no promises. The footsteps grew closer. He was in the second row now. Kaela's pulse quickened despite herself, not from fear, but from the sheer wrongness of standing blind while someone evaluated her like a horse at market. Every instinct she possessed screamed against this vulnerability. In the borderlands, showing your throat meant death. Breathe, she told herself silently. Just breathe and survive this. But then something changed. The footsteps stopped directly in front of her. She felt him before she understood what she was feeling, a wave of heat that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with something primal and impossible. It hit her chest like a fist, drove the air from her lungs, made her skin prickle with electricity she'd never experienced. Her bound hands trembled, not from fear, from recognition. Every hair on her body stood on end. No, she thought desperately. No, this can't be. But it was. She knew it with absolute certainty, even as her rational mind rejected it. The bond, the thing whispered about in old stories, the rare and terrible connection that sometimes ignited between alphas and their true mates. A force that transcended choice, that bypassed logic, that grabbed two souls and slammed them together whether they wanted it or not. She'd always thought those stories were lies told to romanticize arranged marriages. She'd been wrong. The presence in front of her radiated power, not the performative kind men often wielded, but the real thing, patient, controlled, absolute. She could feel his attention on her like physical weight, studying her, measuring her. The silence stretched so long she wondered if he was waiting for her to collapse, or beg, or show weakness. Kaela Thornridge had never begged for anything in her life. She lifted her chin instead, just slightly, just enough to show she wasn't broken. The intake of breath from somewhere behind her told her that gesture had been noticed, possibly gasped at, probably considered shocking. Good. Then, impossibly, she felt hands at the back of her head. Large hands. Warm. They moved to the knot of her blindfold, and she went rigid with disbelief. This wasn't part of the ceremony. This wasn't allowed. The rules were absolute. The king chose in silence, made his selection, and only then, in private, would the chosen woman see his face. The blindfold loosened. "Breaking protocol," someone hissed from somewhere near the throne. "Your Majesty, the traditions clearly state—" "I know what they state." His voice cut through the hall like a blade through silk, deep, rough-edged, carrying authority that didn't need volume. "And I'm ending them. Now." The blindfold fell away. Kaela blinked against sudden light, her eyes adjusting. The hall came into focus. Vaulted ceilings, stone columns, rows of blindfolded women standing like sculptures. And directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the silver threading through his dark hair, stood the Alpha King. Ronan Varric. She'd heard descriptions. Cold, ruthless. A warrior king who'd taken the throne through blood and held it through fear. They said he didn't smile. They said his eyes were empty. They were wrong about the empty part. His eyes were storm gray and burning with the same impossible fire she felt in her chest. He stared at her with an intensity that should have been terrifying, his jaw set, his expression unreadable except for that gaze. He looked like a man who'd just been struck by something he didn't understand and didn't particularly want. She understood that feeling perfectly. "Look at me," he said quietly. It wasn't a command. It was something closer to desperation, like he needed confirmation that this insane thing happening between them was real. Kaela met his eyes directly and felt the bond snap fully into place, a connection so visceral it made her gasp. Emotions that weren't hers flooded through her. Frustration, confusion, and underneath it all, a recognition so profound it shook them both. The hall had gone absolutely silent. "Your Majesty," an older man's voice called from near the throne, sharp with disapproval. "This is highly irregular. The ceremony has specific—" "The ceremony is over." Ronan didn't break eye contact with Kaela. "I've made my choice." Protests erupted immediately. She heard them as if from a distance. Nobles objecting, counselors citing precedent, someone invoking ancient law. But none of it mattered because the king was still staring at her, and she was staring back, and neither of them seemed capable of looking away. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear beneath the chaos. "Kaela Thornridge." Her own voice came out steadier than she expected. "From the borderlands." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe. The borderlands were where the kingdom sent criminals and exiles, where civilization frayed into wilderness. Not exactly prime breeding ground for queens. "Of course you are," he muttered, and she couldn't tell if that was approval or resignation. "Your Majesty." The older man had approached, his face red with indignation. He wore the elaborate robes of high office, chancellor, she guessed, or some equivalent position of power. "You cannot simply discard centuries of tradition because of... He gestured helplessly at Kaela, as if she were a stain on the ceremony's perfection. Ronan finally broke eye contact with her to turn toward the man, and Kaela immediately felt the loss like cold air on exposed skin. "I can do exactly that, Chancellor Kelm. I'm the king." "The traditions exist for reason," Chancellor Kelm's voice rose. "The blindfold ensures objectivity, prevents manipulation, protects against the king actually choosing who he wants," Kaela heard herself say. Every head in the hall turned toward her. She felt the weight of dozens of shocked stares, but it was too late to take it back. And honestly, she didn't want to. Chancellor Kelm's face went from red to purple. "How dare you speak? You haven't been given permission to—" "She has permission." Ronan's voice cut through the Chancellor's sputtering. "She's going to be queen. That means she speaks when she wants." The statement hit like a thunderclap. Several women gasped. One fainted. Kaela's pulse hammered in her throat because this was moving too fast, spiraling beyond anything she'd prepared for. She'd expected to survive the ceremony, maybe get sent home, hopefully avoid becoming trapped in a loveless political marriage. She hadn't expected this. "We need to discuss this privately," Chancellor Kelm said through gritted teeth, his hand gripping Ronan's arm with familiar authority that made Kaela's eyes narrow. "There are procedures, protocols. You cannot simply remove your hand." Ronan's voice had gone quiet in a way that felt dangerous. The Chancellor hesitated, then released him. But his expression remained defiant. "The Council will need to convene. There are questions about lineage, about suitability, about—" "Then convene." Ronan turned back to Kaela and reached for her bound wrists. His fingers brushed her skin as he untied the silk, and the contact sent another wave of that impossible heat through her. "But my decision is final." The silk fell away. Kaela rubbed her wrists, hyper-aware that every person in the hall was watching, judging, calculating what this meant for their own power and position. "Can you walk?" Ronan asked her quietly. "I've been walking since I was 1 year old," she replied. "So yes." His mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "Then walk with me. We need to talk." He offered his hand, not a command, an invitation. Kaela looked at it, then at his face, then at the dozens of people watching them with expressions ranging from shock to fury to calculation. She thought about her father's advice to keep her mouth shut and her eyes down. She thought about the borderlands and the lessons they taught her about survival and instinct. Then she took his hand. The bond flared brighter at the contact, and she saw Ronan's jaw tighten as he felt it too. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't one-sided. It wasn't her imagination. It was real and powerful and completely beyond either of their control. He led her past the rows of still blindfolded women, past the sputtering Chancellor Kelm, past nobles whose faces she didn't know but whose disapproval she could taste in the air. She walked with her head up, her spine straight, refusing to shrink under their judgment. She was a survivor from the borderlands. She'd faced down wolves with nothing but a knife and her wits. These people didn't scare her. Not yet, anyway. They walked through corridors of stone and gold, past guards who snapped to attention and servants who pressed themselves against walls to let them pass. Ronan didn't speak, just kept moving with purpose, his hand still gripping hers like he was afraid she might vanish if he let go. Finally, he pushed open a heavy wooden door and pulled her into a private chamber, some kind of study, lined with books and maps. He released her hand and moved to the far side of the room, putting distance between them as if proximity made it harder to think. Kaela stayed near the door, studying him. In the harsh light from the windows, she could see details she'd missed in the hall. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 30, but he carried himself like someone who'd lived 3 lifetimes of violence. Scars marked his hands. His shoulders held the kind of tension that came from never fully relaxing, never fully trusting. She recognized that. She lived with it too. "Do you feel it?" he asked without turning around. "Yes?" "No point lying. What is it?" "The bond." He gripped the edge of a desk, knuckles white. "I thought it was a myth, something the old texts made up to justify political marriages." "So did I. And yet here we are." He turned to face her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch, bound to each other by something neither of us chose or wanted. The words stung, even though she understood them. "You think I wanted this? To be dragged from my home and paraded in front of you like—" "I know you didn't." His voice was rough. "And I know this system is broken. The selection ceremony, the blindfolds, the whole performance. It's archaic and wrong, but it's what I inherited, and changing it means fighting every tradition, every power structure, every noble who benefits from keeping things exactly as they are." Kaela crossed her arms. "So you just go along with it?" "I've been trying to change it from within. Slowly. Carefully." He laughed bitterly. "And then you happen, and I threw centuries of tradition out the window in front of everyone who matters." "Why?" "Because the bond made it impossible not to." He moved closer, and she forced herself not to step back. "I've spent 10 years as king, Kaela. 10 years making calculated decisions, playing political games, balancing power. And then I felt you in that hall, and every calculation went out of my head. All I could think was, mine." The possessiveness in his voice should have angered her. Instead, it resonated with something equally primal in her own chest. "I'm not a possession," she said quietly. "I know." He stopped a few feet away. But the bond doesn't care about politics or logic. It just is. They stared at each other, and Kaela felt the weight of what was happening settle over her like heavy snow. This wasn't a fairy tale. This was a trap closing around both of them, binding them together through forces they didn't understand or control. "I don't trust you," she said. "Good." Ronan's expression was grim. "You shouldn't. I'm a king, and kings use people. It's what we do." "Then why are you telling me this?" "Because you're going to be queen, and you're going to be in danger from the moment we make this official." He moved to a window, looking out over the city. "The bond makes you a target. Every noble who wants to control me now has leverage. Chancellor Kelm will try to use you against me. Others will try to kill you to break my focus. And some will simply hate you because you're from the borderlands and you don't belong here." Kaela absorbed that, her mind working through implications. "So what do you want from me?" "I want you to survive." He turned back to her. "And I want you to help me burn this whole corrupt system to the ground." The words hung in the air between them, shocking, dangerous, impossible. "You're the king," Kaela said slowly. "You are the system." "No." His voice carried absolute certainty. "I'm a prisoner of it, just like you are now. The difference is, I've been looking for someone strong enough to help me break out." "And you think that's me? A girl from the borderlands who doesn't know anything about court politics or power games?" "I think you survived somewhere that would have killed most of these perfumed nobles in a week." He moved closer again, his gaze locked on hers. "I think you stood blindfolded in front of a room full of predators and still had the courage to lift your chin. I think the bond chose you for a reason." "The bond just happened," Kaela countered. "It doesn't have reasons." "Maybe." His voice dropped. "Or maybe it saw something in you that I need. Fire, strength, the willingness to call things exactly what they are." Kayla's pulse hammered. This was insane. All of it. She should demand to go home, should refuse this whole situation, should protect herself and her family from the danger he was describing. But the borderlands had taught her something else too. Sometimes the only way to survive was to attack first. "You want to destroy the system from within," she said. "How?" Ronan smiled then, a real smile, sharp and dangerous. "First, we start with the truth. Chancellor Darius Kelm has been manipulating kings for 20 years. He controls the council, dictates policy, and lines his pockets with money meant for the people. And he's not alone. The corruption runs deep. And you've known this how long?" "Long enough." His jaw tightened. "But knowing and proving are different things. Kelm is too careful, too protected. I've been gathering evidence for years, but he always stays one step ahead." "So what makes you think that changes now?" "Because now I have you." Ronan held her gaze. "Someone who isn't part of this world, who doesn't owe favors or fear consequences. Someone who can see clearly because you're not blinded by tradition or obligation." Kaela studied him, searching for manipulation, for lies, for the trap she knew had to be hidden somewhere in his words. But all she saw was exhaustion and frustration and something that looked like hope. "If I do this," she said slowly, "if I help you fight this fight, I do it my way. Not as some decorative queen who smiles and waves. I need real power, real authority." "Done. And if I find out you're lying to me, if I discover you're just as corrupt as the people you claim to fight, I walk away. Bond or no bond." Something dark flickered across his face, but he nodded. "Fair." Kaela took a breath. This was madness. This was suicide. This was the most dangerous decision she'd ever made. But the borderlands had also taught her that the biggest risk sometimes brought the biggest rewards. "Then tell me everything," she said. "Every detail you know about Chancellor Kelm and the corruption. Every piece of evidence you have. Every weakness in the system." Ronan moved to the desk and pulled out a thick folder of documents. "It's going to be a long night." "Good." Kaela moved to join him, ignoring the way the bond hummed between them with approval. "I don't sleep much anyway." As he spread the papers across the desk, as he began explaining years of careful investigation and careful frustration, Kaela felt something shift inside her. This wasn't the future she'd imagined. This wasn't the safe, quiet life she'd hoped to return to. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the bond hadn't just connected her to a king. Maybe it had connected her to a purpose. And if she was going to be trapped in this golden cage anyway, she might as well set it on fire. The first assassination attempt came 3 days after the announcement. Kaela was walking through the East Wing corridor, alone except for 2 guards who trailed at a respectful distance, when she noticed the silence. Not peaceful quiet, the wrong kind. The kind that happened when predators were close and prey animals went still. She stopped walking. "Your Majesty?" one of the guards said, using the title she still wasn't used to hearing. "Is something—" The arrow came through the window so fast she barely saw it, but her borderlands instincts were faster than sight. She dropped to the floor as the projectile hissed past where her head had been and buried itself in the opposite wall with a meaty thunk. The guards reacted instantly, swords drawn, surrounding her. But Kaela was already moving, scrambling to the window to catch a glimpse of the archer. She saw nothing but rooftops and shadows. "Get the king," she snapped at one guard. To the other, "Seal this wing, now." They hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, just long enough to show they weren't used to taking orders from her, but then moved. Kaela stayed low, her mind racing. Professional shot, good angle. They'd known exactly where she'd be and when. Someone in the palace had told them. By the time Ronan arrived, the corridor was swarming with guards and the arrow had been removed for examination. He strode toward her with barely controlled fury radiating off him in waves, and she felt it through the bond like heat from a fire. "Are you hurt?" His hands gripped her shoulders, eyes scanning her for injury. "I'm fine." It missed. It shouldn't have gotten that close. He turned to the captain of the guard, his voice dropping to something lethal. "How did an archer get within range of the queen?" The captain's face went pale. "We're investigating, Your Majesty. The security protocols should have..." "Should have?" Ronan's control was fracturing, and Kaela could feel his rage bleeding through the bond. "Someone just tried to kill her in our own palace, and you're telling me about what should have happened?" "Ronan." Kaela touched his arm, drawing his attention back to her. The physical contact steadied him. She could feel it, the way the bond responded to their proximity, pulling his focus away from violence and toward her. "We need to think, not rage." He took a breath, visibly forcing himself under control. "You're right." "The archer knew where I'd be," she continued quietly, aware that everyone was listening. "That means someone told them. Someone in the palace." The implications settled over the corridor like frost. Guards exchanged uneasy glances. The captain's jaw tightened. "We'll find them," Ronan said, but Kaela could hear the frustration beneath the promise. Finding traitors in a court full of people who resented her existence would be like finding specific grains of sand on a beach. "Your Majesty." Chancellor Kelm appeared at the end of the corridor, moving with the careful authority of someone who'd been practicing power for decades. "I came as soon as I heard. Thank the heavens the queen is unharmed." There was something in his tone that made Kaela's skin crawl. Too smooth, too practiced. "Yes," Ronan said flatly. "Thank the heavens." Kelm approached, his expression perfectly calibrated to concern. "This is precisely why I cautioned against such a hasty selection. A queen from the borderlands with no training in court security, no understanding of the dangers. Are you suggesting this is my fault?" Kaela heard herself say. Every person in the corridor went still. "You didn't interrupt the Chancellor. You didn't challenge him. Certainly not if you'd only been queen for 3 days. Kelm's eyes fixed on her with reptilian coldness. "I'm suggesting, Your Majesty, that your unconventional background may have made you a target for those who question the king's judgment." "My background?" Kaela stepped toward him, ignoring Ronan's warning hand on her shoulder. "You mean the fact that I come from a place where people say what they mean instead of hiding knives behind pretty words?" A muscle twitched in Kelm's jaw. "I mean that the court has certain expectations, certain standards, and when those are violated, then the court can learn to adjust," Ronan cut in, his voice hard as stone. "Kaela is queen. Anyone who can't accept that is free to leave my service." The challenge hung in the air. Kelm's expression never changed, but Kaela saw something flicker in his eyes. Calculation. Reassessment. "Of course, Your Majesty," he said smoothly. "I only wish to protect the crown, and the queen, naturally." He bowed and withdrew, taking several nervous-looking nobles with him. As soon as they were gone, Ronan pulled Kaela into a side chamber and shut the door. "You can't antagonize him directly," he said, pacing like a caged wolf. "Not yet. He's too powerful, too connected." "He just implied I brought this on myself," Kaela shot back. "You expect me to smile and curtsy?" "I expect you to be smart." Ronan stopped pacing, meeting her eyes. Kelm doesn't make mistakes. If he's showing this much hostility this early, it means he's either very confident or very threatened. "Both," Kaela said. "He's threatened because the bond makes me harder to control than his previous queens, and he's confident because he thinks a borderlands girl can't possibly outmaneuver him." Ronan studied her, and she saw the moment he recognized something. "You have a plan." "Not yet." She moved to the window, looking out over the sprawling capital. "But I'm starting to understand how this works. Kelm survives by staying in the shadows, pulling strings while staying untouchable. So we need to drag him into the light." "Easier said than done. I've been trying for years." "You've been trying like a king," Kaela interrupted. "All official investigations and formal procedures. But predators don't follow rules, and neither do I." She could feel his attention sharpen through the bond. "What are you suggesting?" "In the borderlands, when you're tracking something dangerous, you don't chase it head on. You learn its patterns, find where it feeds, and then you set a trap." Ronan was quiet for a long moment. "You want to bait him. I want to make him think I'm weak, vulnerable, the perfect target." Kaela turned from the window. "And when he moves against me again, because he will, we'll be ready." "That's insane and dangerous." "Yes." She held his gaze. "But sitting here waiting for the next arrow is more dangerous. At least this way we control when and where the next attack happens." She could see him wrestling with it, could feel his protective instincts warring with his strategic mind through the bond. Finally, he nodded. "All right, but we do this carefully, and you don't take any unnecessary risks." Kaela almost laughed. "Everything about this situation is an unnecessary risk, but I didn't survive wolves by playing it safe." Over the next 2 weeks, Kaela played her part perfectly. She made mistakes in court, small ones calculated to make her seem overwhelmed and out of her depth. She mispronounced noble names, she wore the wrong colors to formal events, she asked questions that revealed her ignorance of court politics. The nobles ate it up. She could see their contempt growing, their smug satisfaction at watching this borderlands upstart flounder. And through it all, Chancellor Kelm watched with the patience of a snake, waiting for prey to weaken. But while Kaela played the fool in public, she spent her nights doing something entirely different. She hunted. Ronan had given her access to years of collected evidence, documents, testimonies, financial records that didn't quite add up. It was all there, proof of Kelm's corruption, but nothing concrete enough to bring formal charges. Everything was buried under layers of bureaucracy and plausible deniability. Kaela approached it differently. She didn't look for legal proof. She looked for patterns. "Here," she said one night, spreading papers across Ronan's desk. They'd fallen into a rhythm, days spent playing their public roles, nights spent in his study, planning. "Look at these payment records. Every 3rd month, there's a transfer to a merchant company in the southern provinces." Ronan leaned over her shoulder, close enough that she could feel his warmth. The bond hummed contentedly at the proximity, which was becoming harder to ignore. "I've seen those. They're listed as supplies for the Royal Guard. Except the Guard Quartermaster has his own budget line." Kaela pointed to another document. "So why is Kelm approving separate payments for the same supplies?" She watched understanding dawn on Ronan's face. "He's siphoning money. Not just money. Look at the amounts." She laid out 6 months of records. "They increase every time. He's getting bolder. Or more desperate," Ronan said quietly. "What if he knows I'm getting close?" Kaela felt a chill. If Kelm was desperate, that made him more dangerous. Desperate predators were unpredictable. "Then we need to move faster," she said. "Do you have someone you trust? Really trust?" Ronan was quiet for a moment. "Captain Dara Ven. She commands the Palace Night Watch. I've known her since I took the throne. She's loyal. Can she investigate without Kelm knowing? If anyone can, she can. Then have her trace these payments. Find out where the money really goes." Kaela gathered the documents. And I'll keep playing the helpless queen. The more Kelm thinks I'm harmless, the less attention he'll pay to what I'm actually doing. But maintaining that facade was harder than she'd expected. Every time a noble sneered at her, every whispered insult she pretended not to hear, every moment of manufactured incompetence, it wore on her. She was used to fighting openly, not hiding her strength. The bond didn't help. Ronan felt every slight, every insult, and his fury bled through their connection like poison. She could sense him fighting the urge to defend her publicly, to shut down every person who questioned her worth. "You can't," she told him one night when his control was particularly thin. "The moment you defend me, they'll know we're working together. They'll get suspicious." "I don't care." His voice was rough. "Watching them treat you like you're nothing." "I am nothing to them," Kaela said bluntly. "I'm a borderlands girl who doesn't belong here. And they're not entirely wrong." "They are wrong." Ronan moved closer, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "You're stronger than any of them. Smarter. More honest. The bond didn't choose you by accident." "You don't know that." "I do." He reached up, his hand hovering near her face, but not quite touching. "I feel what you feel, Kaela. Your strength, your determination, your absolute refusal to break no matter what they throw at you. That's not nothing." The air between them felt charged, electric. The bond was pulling them together with increasing insistence, and Kaela was running out of reasons to resist it. "This is a bad idea," she whispered. "I know." "We should stay focused on Kelm." "I know. And the bond is manipulating us. This isn't real." "Isn't it?" His hand finally made contact, fingers brushing her jaw with devastating gentleness. "Because it feels real to me." Kayla's pulse hammered. She should step back, should maintain distance, should remember that she didn't trust him, didn't trust this situation, didn't trust anything about this golden cage she'd been trapped in. But the borderlands had also taught her about instinct, and every instinct she possessed was screaming that this, whatever this was between them, was the most real thing she'd felt since arriving in this palace of lies. She closed the distance and kissed him. The bond exploded between them like lightning, fierce and overwhelming. Ronan made a sound low in his throat and pulled her closer, one hand tangling in her hair while the other gripped her waist. The connection intensified until Kaela couldn't tell where her emotions ended and his began. Desire, frustration, fear, hope, all mixing together in a storm that threatened to consume them both. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kaela felt dizzy. "That was," Ronan started. "A mistake," Kaela finished, even though every cell in her body disagreed. "We can't afford distractions." "Right. But he didn't move away, didn't release her." "Completely agree." "I should go." "Probably." Neither of them moved. The bond thrummed between them, satisfied and hungry for more. Kaela forced herself to step back, to put physical distance between them before she did something even more reckless. "Tomorrow," she said, her voice not quite steady. "Captain Ven's report should be ready. We'll see what she found." Ronan nodded, running a hand through his hair. "Tomorrow." Kaela made it to the door before he spoke again. "Kaela." She turned. "It wasn't a mistake," he said quietly, "and you know it." She left without answering because he was right, and that terrified her more than any assassination attempt. Captain Dara Ven delivered her report 3 days later, in Ronan's study with all the windows sealed and guards posted outside. She was a compact woman with iron-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. "The merchant company is fake," she said without preamble, laying documents on the desk. "The address is a warehouse that burned down 5 years ago. The payments go to a private account controlled by—" She paused, her expression grim. "Lord Matthias Crane." Kaela exchanged a look with Ronan. Lord Crane was one of Kelm's closest allies on the council. "How much are we talking about?" Ronan asked. 2 million gold over the past 4 years. Ven's jaw tightened. Money that should have gone to infrastructure, to the borderlands territories, to people who needed it, Kaela finished softly. She thought about her village, about families who struggled through harsh winters while nobles in the capital stole money that could have saved lives. The anger that filled her was cold and absolute. "Can we prove Kelm authorized the payments?" Ronan asked. Ven hesitated. "The authorization signatures are Kelm's, but he'll claim they were forged. We need something that ties him directly to Crane, something undeniable. Then we get it, Kaela said. When does Crane report to Kelm? They meet every week, Ven said. Private meetings in Kelm's chambers. Can we listen? The chambers are warded against eavesdropping. We'd need to be inside. An idea was forming in Kaela's mind, dangerous and possibly insane, but that seemed to be her specialty lately. What if I was inside? She said. Both Ronan and Ven stared at her. Absolutely not, Ronan said immediately. Why not? I'm the helpless borderlands queen who doesn't understand court politics, remember? Kaela's mind was racing now. Everyone thinks I'm incompetent. What if I got lost in the palace, wandered into Kelm's chambers by mistake? That's suicide, Ven said bluntly. If Kelm catches you, he won't kill me directly. Not yet. He still needs to maintain appearances. Kaela looked at Ronan. But he might say something revealing if he thinks I'm too stupid to understand what I'm hearing. She could feel Ronan's resistance through the bond, his every instinct screaming against putting her in danger. But she could also feel the moment his strategic mind recognized the value of her plan. I don't like this, he said. I know. If something goes wrong, then you'll feel it through the bond and come get me. Kaela held his gaze. But this is our chance. Kelm is getting suspicious. We need concrete evidence now before he destroys it. Ronan closed his eyes briefly, wrestling with the decision. Finally, he looked at Ven. Can you position guards nearby without alerting Kelm's people? Yes. Ven's expression was reluctant. But, Your Majesty, if the Queen is discovered, I'll handle it, Kaela said with more confidence than she felt. I've been playing stupid for weeks. What's one more performance? The plan was set for the following week during Kelm's regular meeting with Lord Crane. Kaela spent the days beforehand memorizing the palace layout, planning her escape routes, and trying not to think about all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. The night before, she couldn't sleep. She lay in her chambers, staring at the ceiling, feeling Ronan's presence through the bond. He wasn't sleeping either. She could sense his agitation, his fear for her, his frustration at being helpless to protect her. Finally, she gave up and went to find him. He was in his chambers, pacing like he had been for hours. When she entered, he turned with an expression of relief and resignation. I knew you'd come, he said. Can't sleep. Neither can I. He moved to pour wine, handed her a glass. I keep thinking of everything that could go wrong tomorrow. Only everything? Kaela took a sip. I've got a detailed list. That surprised a laugh out of him. And you're still going through with it. I survived the borderlands. I can survive one corrupt chancellor. The borderlands were honest, Ronan said quietly. They tried to kill you openly. Kelm will smile while he slides the knife in. Then I'll smile back. Kaela set down her wine. Ronan, I need to do this. Not just for the evidence, but because I need to prove, to myself, to everyone, that I'm not just some helpless queen who needs protecting. I know. He moved closer. But that doesn't mean I have to like it. You don't have to like it. You just have to trust me. I do trust you. His hand found hers. It's everyone else I don't trust. The bond flared at the contact, warm and reassuring. Kaela realized she'd come to depend on it. This connection that let her feel his emotions, his support, his absolute belief in her even when she doubted herself. If this works, she said softly, if we actually get evidence against Kelm, what then? Then we expose him in front of the entire court, publicly. No shadows, no backroom deals. Ronan's expression hardened, and we watch his empire crumble. And if it doesn't work, then we adapt. We survive. We find another way. He pulled her closer. That's what we do, isn't it? Survive? Kaela leaned into him, letting herself take comfort in his presence for just this moment. Tomorrow she'd be the fearless queen walking into danger. Tonight, she could just be Kaela, scared and determined and held together by sheer stubbornness and the bond connecting her to this complicated, dangerous man. Stay with me tonight, Ronan said quietly. I need to know you're safe for a few more hours. She should say no, should maintain distance, should remember all her careful rules about not getting too attached. But those rules had been breaking since the moment he removed her blindfold. Okay, she whispered. They didn't sleep. They just held each other through the long night, the bond wrapping around them like armor against what was coming. And when dawn finally broke, Kaela rose feeling steadier than she had in weeks. She was ready. The afternoon light slanted through palace windows as Kaela made her way toward Kelm's chambers. She'd timed it perfectly. The weekly meeting would just be starting. Guards were positioned nearby, though far enough to avoid suspicion. Ronan was in his study, monitoring through the bond, ready to move at the first sign of trouble. She turned a corner and nearly collided with Lady Sarah Blackwood, one of the court's most vicious gossips. "Your Majesty!" Lady Sarah's surprise seemed genuine. "Are you lost?" "Perfect." "Oh, Kaela manufactured confusion. "I was looking for the library. The servants gave me directions, but I think I misunderstood." She could see Lady Sarah's barely concealed contempt. "The library is in the West Wing, Your Majesty. You're in the administrative corridor." "Oh, no." Kaela bit her lip, playing the part. "I'm hopeless with directions. In the borderlands, you just walk until you find what you need." "How rustic." Lady Sarah's smile was poisonous. "Perhaps you should request an escort. We wouldn't want you wandering into somewhere inappropriate." "That's very kind of you." Kaela started to turn away, then stopped, as if struck by a thought. "Actually, is the Chancellor's office nearby? I've been meaning to thank him for his patience with my adjustments." The lie came easily. Lady Sarah's expression shifted to something calculating. "Just down this corridor," she said, "but third door on the left. Though I believe he's in a meeting." "Oh, I won't disturb him," Kaela smiled brightly. "I'll just wait outside. Thank you so much for your help." She walked away before Lady Sarah could protest, heading straight for Kelm's chambers. The door was closed. She could hear voices inside, muffled but present. Kaela looked around. The corridor was empty, except for one guard at the far end, positioned more for show than security. She'd studied the layout. Next to Kelm's main chamber was a small antechamber used for storage. If she could get inside, the antechamber door was unlocked. Careless. Or perhaps Kelm was arrogant enough to think no one would dare spy on him. Kaela slipped inside, closing the door silently behind her. The room was dark, filled with old furniture and forgotten supplies. But more importantly, the wall adjacent to Kelm's main chamber was thin enough that she could hear voices clearly. "Cannot continue like this." That was Crane, his voice tight with stress. "The king has been asking questions, detailed questions about the Southern payment records." "Let him ask." Kelm's voice was smooth, unconcerned. "The records show exactly what they need to show." "But if he digs deeper," "He won't. I've made sure the trail goes cold at your warehouse." A pause. "Though I admit, this new queen complicates things." Kaela's pulse quickened. "The borderland savage?" Crane scoffed. "She's barely literate, from what I hear." "She's smarter than she appears," Kelm said, and there was something sharp in his voice. "The king chose her through the bond, which means she has influence. And she's been asking the wrong questions. Then eliminate her." "I tried. The arrow missed." "So it had been Kelm." Kaela's hands clenched into fists. "Try again," Crane said, "before she stumbles onto something that could hurt us." "Patience." Kelm's voice carried the weight of experience. "Crude assassination attempts make martyrs. Better to discredit her first. Make the court hate her so thoroughly that when she disappears, no one asks questions." "How long will that take?" "Not long. She's already making mistakes. Give her another month, and the nobles will be begging me to remove her." A soft laugh. "The king will be forced to choose between his bond and his crown. And when he chooses the crown, as he must, she'll be sent back to the borderlands in disgrace." "And if he doesn't choose the crown?" Silence. Then Kelm spoke with quiet menace. "Then he'll have an accident, and his successor will be far more manageable." Kaela's blood ran cold. They were planning to kill Ronan if he didn't abandon her. She needed to get out, needed to tell him. Her hand reached for the door and knocked over a forgotten vase. The crash seemed impossibly loud in the quiet room. Kaela froze as the voices in the next chamber went silent. Then Kelm's voice, sharp. "Check that." Footsteps approached. Kaela looked around frantically for another exit, for anywhere to hide. Nothing. The antechamber was a trap. The door opened. Lord Crane stood there, his face shifting from confusion to shock to fury as he recognized her. "Well," Chancellor Kelm said, appearing behind Crane with an expression of cold satisfaction. "It seems our helpless queen isn't quite as lost as she pretends to be." Kaela straightened her spine, lifting her chin in the gesture that had become her signature. Her mind raced through options, through escape routes, through anything that might get her out of this alive. Through the bond, she felt Ronan's sudden alarm as he sensed her fear, and she realized with crystal clarity that she'd just made a terrible mistake. Kaela's mind worked faster than it ever had in the borderlands, faster than when she'd faced wolves with only a knife, faster than the night her village burned and she'd had to choose between fight or flight. This time, there was nowhere to run. Chancellor Kelm stepped fully into the antechamber, his expression a mask of polite concern that didn't reach his cold eyes. Lord Crane moved to block the only exit, his hand resting casually on the sword at his hip. "Your Majesty," Kelm said, his voice dripping with false courtesy. "What a surprise to find you here. Are you lost again?" The question was a trap. If she admitted to eavesdropping, they'd know she'd heard everything. If she played stupid, they might let her walk away, but they'd also accelerate their plans to destroy her. Through the bond, she felt Ronan's presence surge. He was moving, coming for her. But the palace was large, and he was too far away. Kaela made her choice. "No," she said clearly. "I'm not lost. I came here specifically to hear what you're really planning." Crane's hand tightened on his sword hilt. "You admit to spying on the Chancellor?" "I admit to investigating corruption." Kaela kept her voice steady even as her pulse hammered, which is exactly what a queen should do when her kingdom is being stolen from underneath her. Kelm's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Reassessment. He'd expected her to crumble or beg. Instead, she just declared war. "Bold words," he said softly, "from someone in such a vulnerable position." "Am I vulnerable?" Kaela took a step forward, forcing herself to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. "The king knows I'm here. His guards are positioned throughout this wing, and if I don't walk out of this room in the next 2 minutes, he'll come looking for me personally." It was mostly true. The guards were nearby, and Ronan was definitely coming. "Then we have 2 minutes," Kelm said. "Let me be very clear, girl. You are nothing. A borderlands savage who stumbled into power through an accident of biology. The bond may have given you access to the king's bed, but it doesn't give you authority in this court." "The law disagrees," Kaela shot back. "I'm queen. That gives me the same authority as any ruler." "The law is what I say it is." Kelm's mask of civility was cracking. "I've controlled this kingdom for 20 years. I've managed 3 kings before Ronan, and I'll manage whoever comes after him. You are an inconvenience, nothing more." "Then why are you so afraid of me?" The question hung in the air. Crane shifted nervously. Kelm's jaw tightened. "I'm not afraid of you," he said. "I'm simply tired of cleaning up messes. The king's infatuation with you has become a distraction. It ends today." He nodded to Crane, who drew his sword. Kaela's options crystallized with brutal clarity. She could scream for help, but Crane would cut her down before guards arrived. She could try to fight, but she was unarmed and untrained in court-style combat. Or she could gamble everything on one desperate move. She chose the gamble. "You're right," she said, raising her hands in apparent surrender. "I'm nothing. Just a stupid borderlands girl who doesn't understand how power works." Kelm's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "But you're wrong about one thing," Kaela continued, backing toward the wall. "I don't need to understand power. I just need to understand predators." Her hand found what she'd been searching for, a heavy iron candlestick on the shelf behind her. "And predators," she said, gripping it, "always underestimate prey." She swung the candlestick at the window. Glass exploded outward in a shower of glittering fragments. The crash was deafening in the quiet wing. Alarm bells began ringing immediately. Palace protocol for broken windows, a security measure designed to alert guards to possible intrusion. Or escape. Crane lunged toward her, but Kaela was already moving. She grabbed a piece of broken glass, ignoring the bite of pain as it cut her palm, and held it up like a weapon. "Stay back," she warned. The antechamber door burst open. Guards poured in, swords drawn, and behind them, moving with lethal speed, came Ronan. His eyes found her immediately, taking in the broken window, the blood on her hand, the sword in Crane's grip. The bond exploded with his rage, so intense that Kaela staggered. "Lower your weapon," Ronan said to Crane, his voice barely above a whisper. That quiet tone was more terrifying than any shout. "Now!" Crane hesitated, looking to Kelm for guidance. "This is a misunderstanding," Kelm said smoothly, his mask of composure sliding back into place. "We discovered the Queen in here after hearing a noise. Lord Crane drew his sword thinking she might be an intruder." "Liar." The word came from Kaela, cutting through Kelm's explanation like a blade. "Tell them what you really said. Tell them how you've been stealing money for years. Tell them how you plan to kill the king if he didn't abandon me." The guard shifted, uncertain. Kelm's expression remained perfectly controlled. "The Queen appears distressed," he said to Ronan. "Perhaps the stress of her new position has affected her judgment. These wild accusations are true," Kaela interrupted. "I heard everything. Every word about the fake merchant company, the payments to Lord Crane, your plans to discredit me. All of it." The word of a frightened girl against the Chancellor of the Realm? Kelm's voice carried just the right note of sympathetic concern. "Your Majesty, I understand the bond makes you protective, but surely you see—" "I see," Ronan said, his eyes never leaving Kaela, "that my queen is bleeding and scared and telling me that you threatened her life. That's all I need to see." He moved toward her, and the guards parted instinctively. When he reached her, he took her injured hand with surprising gentleness, examining the cut from the glass. "Are you hurt anywhere else?" he asked quietly. "No." Kaela's voice shook despite her best efforts. "But Ronan, everything I said is true. They admitted—" "I know." His thumb brushed over her wrist, just above the wound. "I heard some of it through the bond. Your fear was so sharp I felt every word like a knife." He turned back to Kelm, still holding Kaela's hand. "You're under arrest," he said. "You and Lord Crane both." "On what charges?" Kelm's composure finally cracked, anger bleeding through. "The unsupported claims of a girl who was caught spying? You have no proof, no evidence." "Actually," a new voice said from the doorway, "we do." Captain Venn entered carrying a leather folder. Her expression was grim satisfaction. "I took the liberty of continuing the investigation while Your Majesty was occupied. We traced the payments beyond Lord Crane's account. They lead to a private estate registered under your wife's maiden name, Chancellor, and the amount matches what's missing from the royal treasury down to the copper." Kelm's face went white. "We also have testimony," Venn continued, "from 3 servants who witnessed you meeting with Lord Crane to discuss the Queen's assassination. And we have the archer who took the shot, currently in our custody, very willing to talk in exchange for clemency." The silence in the antechamber was absolute. Kaela watched Kelm's expression cycle through shock, fury, and finally cold calculation. "This is a coup," he said, looking directly at Ronan. "You're using manufactured evidence and a convenient bond to remove the one person who kept this kingdom stable." "You kept yourself powerful," Ronan corrected. "There's a difference." "The council will never support this. The nobles will see the evidence," Ronan interrupted. "All of it. In public. Tomorrow." Kelm's eyes widened. "You wouldn't dare. The scandal is exactly what this kingdom needs." Ronan's voice was steel. 20 years of corruption exposed. Let everyone see what you've done. You'll destroy the court's credibility. Undermine the entire system. "Good," Kaela said, and every eye turned to her. "Maybe it's time this system was undermined. Maybe people should see that their leaders have been lying to them." Kelm looked at her with pure hatred. "You stupid girl. You have no idea what you've done." "The stability of the realm was built on your theft and manipulation," she finished. "That's not stability. That's tyranny wearing a pretty mask." "Take them," Ronan ordered the guards. "Secure them in separate cells, no visitors, and double the watch." As guards moved to restrain Kelm and Crane, the Chancellor spoke one last time, his voice low and venomous. "This isn't over, Boy King. You think exposing me will fix anything? The corruption runs deeper than you know. Remove me, and 10 others will take my place. You've won a battle. But the war?" He smiled coldly. "You've already lost." They dragged him out. Lord Crane went quietly, his face pale with shock. When the antechamber finally emptied, leaving only Ronan, Kaela, and Captain Venn, the tension didn't ease. "Is he right?" Kaela asked quietly. "Will others just take his place?" "Probably," Venn said with brutal honesty. "Kelm built a network over decades. We'll be rooting out his people for years." "Then we start tomorrow," Ronan said. "Public exposure. Let everyone see the proof. Then we start trials." "The court will fight you," Venn warned. "Half the nobles owe Kelm favors. The other half are implicated in his schemes." "Let them fight." Ronan's expression was grim determination. "Kayla's right. The system is broken, and if we don't fix it now, it'll just keep breaking people." Venn nodded and left to oversee the prisoners. Alone with Ronan, Kaela felt the adrenaline crash hit her like a wave. Her legs went weak. He caught her before she fell, pulling her against his chest. "You terrified me," he said into her hair. "When I felt your fear through the bond." "I'm sorry." Her voice was muffled against his shirt. "I had to get evidence." "You got it, and nearly died in the process." "But I didn't." She pulled back to look at him. "We have him, Ronan. We actually have him." "We have him," he agreed. "But Kelm was right about one thing. Tomorrow is going to be brutal. When we expose this publicly, the entire court will explode. Every noble with something to hide will come after us." "Good." Kaela managed a shaky smile. "I'm tired of fighting in the shadows." The council chamber had never been so crowded. Every noble in the capital had shown up, along with guild representatives, merchant leaders, and even some common citizens who'd heard rumors of something unprecedented happening. They packed the galleries and lined the walls, a sea of curious and suspicious faces. Kaela stood beside Ronan's throne, wearing formal court dress for the first time since her coronation. The fabric was heavy, uncomfortable, but she wore it like armor. Let them see their queen. Let them see she wasn't hiding. The murmur of conversation died as Chancellor Kelm was brought in. He wore chains, a shocking sight for the man who'd controlled this chamber for 2 decades. But his expression remained defiant, his head held high. "This is unprecedented," Lord Varric, the highest-ranking noble after Kelm, said from his seat. "To chain the Chancellor without proper trial?" "He'll have his trial," Ronan said, his voice carrying through the chamber. "Right now, in front of everyone." Shocked silence. Then Lord Varric found his voice. "Your Majesty, these matters are traditionally handled in private." "Privacy is what allowed this corruption to fester," Kaela said, and the crowd stirred at her interruption. "The people have a right to know what's been done in their name." "The Queen speaks out of turn," someone called from the gallery. "She has no authority in council matters." "She has every authority," Ronan countered. "And she's right. Captain Venn, present the evidence." What followed was brutal and methodical. Venn laid out 4 years of financial records, showing exactly how Kelm had siphoned money from the treasury. She presented testimony from servants, from the captured archer, from merchants who'd been coerced into participating. She showed the private estate, the hidden accounts, the web of bribery that kept Kelm's schemes hidden. The crowd's mood shifted with each revelation. Shock became anger. Anger became outrage. "These accusations are fabricated," Kelm said, when given a chance to speak. "Manufactured by a king who wants to consolidate power and a queen who doesn't understand our ways." "Then explain the money," Kaela said. "Explain the estate in your wife's name. Explain why you authorize payments to a company that doesn't exist. Clerical errors. Mistakes made by subordinates. Subordinates like Lord Crane." Ronan gestured to where Crane sat in his own chains. "Who's already confessed to everything in exchange for clemency." Kelm's mask cracked. Just for a moment, rage showed through. "You turned my own people against me." "No," Ronan said quietly. "You did that when you made them complicit in theft and murder." "Murder?" The crowd erupted at that. "Who was murdered?" "The Queen," Kelm said before Ronan could answer. "Or rather, I tried to have her killed. Is that what you want to hear? Yes, I ordered the assassination attempt, because she's dangerous. She's manipulating the king through the bond, turning him against his own court." "I'm not manipulating anyone," Kaela cut in, her voice sharp. "I'm just refusing to pretend corruption is tradition." "You're a borderlands savage who doesn't belong here." Kelm's composure shattered completely. "You know nothing about running a kingdom. Nothing about the delicate balance required to maintain order. The bond is a biological accident, nothing more. It doesn't make you qualified to rule. Maybe not, Kaela agreed, but it makes me qualified to see through liars. The crowd murmured approval. Kaela felt the shift in the room. People were listening to her now, really listening, not because of her title or the bond, but because she was saying what they'd been thinking. Chancellor Kelm, Ronan said formally, you are found guilty of embezzlement, conspiracy, and attempted murder. The sentence is immediate removal from office and seizure of all assets. You can't do this, Kelm hissed. The council must approve. I am the king, Ronan said, his voice ringing through the chamber. And I'm done asking permission to do what's right. Guards moved to remove Kelm. He fought them, screaming accusations, threats, promises of vengeance. But they dragged him out anyway, and the crowd watched in stunned silence. When the doors closed behind him, Lord Varric stood slowly. Your Majesty, he said carefully, I understand your anger. Kelm's betrayal is shocking, but surely you see that this public spectacle undermines the dignity of the court. The court has no dignity, Kaela said before Ronan could respond. Not when it's built on stolen money and lies. The Queen is young, Varric said with barely concealed condescension. She doesn't understand the complexities. I understand that people in the borderlands are starving while nobles in the capital feast on stolen gold, Kaela interrupted. I understand that families freeze through winter because the money meant for infrastructure went into Kelm's private accounts. What complexity am I missing, exactly? Varric's jaw tightened. Your Majesty, perhaps you should muzzle your bride before she says something truly offensive. The chamber went absolutely silent. The word muzzle hung in the air like poison. Ronan stood slowly, his expression dangerous. What did you just say? Varric seemed to realize his mistake. I merely meant that the Queen's lack of experience. You told me to muzzle my wife. Ronan's voice was quiet and lethal. As if she were an animal to be controlled. Your Majesty, I apologize if... Save it. Ronan descended from the throne platform, moving toward Varric with predatory focus. Every person in this chamber just heard you disrespect your queen, so here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize to her, publicly, on your knees. Varric went pale. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. Ronan stopped directly in front of him. Kneel, apologize, or join Kelm in a cell. The crowd held its breath. This was about more than an insult. This was Ronan drawing a line, making it clear that Kaela was untouchable. Varric looked around the chamber, searching for support. He found none. Finally, his pride crumbling, he knelt. Your Majesty, he said to Kaela, his voice tight with humiliation. I apologize for my disrespectful words. Kaela looked down at him, at this powerful lord on his knees, and felt no satisfaction, just exhaustion. Accepted, she said quietly. Now, get up. Varric rose, his face red with shame and barely suppressed rage. Kaela knew she'd just made a permanent enemy, but she'd also sent a message to every noble in the chamber. The borderlands savage wasn't going to be dismissed. The council session continued for hours. More evidence was presented. More officials were implicated. By the time it ended, 7 nobles had been arrested and twice that many were under investigation. The kingdom's entire power structure was collapsing. That night, exhausted and overwhelmed, Kaela stood in her chambers trying to process what they'd done. They'd won. Kelm was defeated, his corruption exposed, his network dismantled. So why did she feel like they'd just started something far more dangerous? A knock at her door. Ronan entered without waiting for permission, his expression grim. We have a problem, he said. Another one? The Borderlands territories have sent a delegation. They want to speak with you, specifically you. Kaela's pulse quickened. Why me? Because word has spread about what happened today, about how you stood up to Kelm, how you exposed the corruption. Ronan handed her a letter. They're calling you the Borderlands Queen, and they want you to lead their petition for independence. The words hit like a physical blow. Independence. The Borderlands territories wanted to break away from the kingdom entirely. That's treason, Kaela whispered. Technically, Yes. Ronan moved to the window. But they have legitimate grievances. The capital has ignored them for decades, stolen their resources, left them to die in harsh winters. Can you blame them for wanting out? No. Kaela sank into a chair. But if the borderlands secede, it'll start a civil war. Probably. Ronan's voice was heavy. And they want you to be their champion. You're one of them. You have the king's ear. You're the perfect bridge between worlds. Or the perfect way to tear the kingdom apart. They looked at each other, and Kaela saw the same exhaustion in his eyes that she felt in her bones. They'd just won a major victory, and it had immediately complicated into something far worse. What do I tell them? She asked. That's up to you. Ronan came to kneel beside her chair. You're queen. You have authority, but you're also from the borderlands. You understand their pain. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. Even if I decide to support their independence? Even then. He took her hand. The bond means I trust you completely, even when it's hard. Kaela stared at their joined hands, feeling the weight of impossible choices settling on her shoulders. Support the borderlands and risk civil war. Deny them and betray her own people. There was no right answer. When do they arrive? She asked. 3 days. 3 days to decide the fate of a kingdom. Kaela spent those 3 days in a haze of preparation and dread. She studied the borderlands' grievances, and there were many. Decades of neglect, resources extracted without compensation, people dying from preventable causes because the capital diverted funds meant for them. Kelm's corruption had made it worse, but the problems ran deeper. The entire kingdom was built on the assumption that the borderlands existed to serve the capital, not the other way around. The delegation arrived exactly on schedule. 10 representatives from different borderlands territories, weather-worn and hard-eyed. They looked like they'd walked through storms to get here. Kaela met them in a private chamber, alone except for Ronan, who stood quietly in the corner. She'd insisted on no guards, no advisors, just people talking honestly. Your Majesty, the delegation leader said. His name was Marcus Flint, and he had the same kind of survivor's eyes Kaela saw in her own reflection. Thank you for seeing us. Of course, Kaela gestured for them to sit. I grew up in the borderlands. You're my people. Are we? The question came from a woman named Sarah Winterhollow. Because you're queen now. You live in a palace. You married the king who's been ignoring us for a decade. The challenge was direct and fair. Kaela didn't flinch from it. You're right, she said. I have privilege now that I didn't earn, but I haven't forgotten where I came from, or what it's like to watch people you love suffer because the capital doesn't care. Then help us, Marcus said. We want independence, full territorial autonomy. We'll still trade with the kingdom, still maintain diplomatic relations. But we govern ourselves, keep our own resources, make our own decisions. That's secession, Ronan spoke for the first time. The council will never accept it peacefully. The council can burn, Sarah said flatly. We don't serve them anymore. You'll start a war, Kaela said quietly. You know that, right? The capital won't let you leave without a fight. Then we fight. Marcus's expression was granite. We've survived everything else. We'll survive war too. Will you? Kaela leaned forward. The capital has armies, resources, trained soldiers. What do the borderlands have? People who refuse to die quietly, Sarah answered. People who know how to survive in conditions that would kill your nobles in a week. People who are tired of being treated like cattle. Kaela felt the truth of those words in her bones. She'd been one of those people. Still was, underneath the crown and fancy dresses. If I support you, she said slowly, if I use my position to champion your cause, it'll destroy any chance of peaceful reform. The nobles will see it as betrayal. They'll turn on me and Ronan both. We're not asking you to sacrifice yourself, Marcus said. We're asking you to remember who you are, where you come from, and decide whose side you're really on. The choice crystallized in Kaela's mind with brutal clarity. She could stay safe in the palace, work within the system, hope that slow change would eventually help the borderlands. Or she could risk everything to fight for the people who shared her scars. It wasn't really a choice at all. I'll support you, she said, but not the way you think. Marcus frowned. What do you mean? Independence is the end goal, yes. But if we push for it now, we'll get war, bloodshed, and the borderlands will suffer most. Kaela stood, pacing. Instead, we demand autonomy, local governance, control over your own resources and decisions, but still technically part of the kingdom. That's not independence, Sarah protested. No, but it's achievable, and it's a foundation. Kaela turned to face them. We get autonomy first. Prove the borderlands can govern themselves. Then, when you're strong enough, when you have infrastructure and resources, then you push for full independence, from a position of power, not desperation. The delegation exchanged looks. Marcus spoke first. That could take years. Better than dying in a war you can't win. Kaela's voice was hard. I know you're angry. I am too. But suicide isn't strategy. Silence fell. Then Sarah laughed bitterly. She really is one of us, she said to Marcus. Only a borderland survivor would be that ruthlessly practical. Is that a yes? Kaela asked. Marcus studied her for a long moment. It's a maybe. We'll discuss it with our people. But Kaela, Your Majesty, if we agree to this path, we need you to fight for it. Really fight, not just political maneuvering. We need you to make the capital understand that the borderlands aren't going to be ignored anymore. I can do that, Kaela said, and meant it. After the delegation left, Ronan moved to stand beside her. That was brilliant, he said quietly, and dangerous. The council will resist even autonomy. I know. Kaela felt the weight of what she'd just committed to. But it's the right thing to do. Agreed. He pulled her close. Though I should warn you, Lord Varric has been gathering support. He's planning something. Let him plan. Kaela leaned into Ronan's warmth, drawing strength from the bond. We've beaten worse. The attack came 2 days later, in the most public way possible. The entire court had gathered for a formal dinner, one of those elaborate affairs that Kaela still found suffocating. She sat beside Ronan at the head table, enduring endless courses and meaningless conversation. Then Lord Varric stood, calling for attention. Your Majesty, he said with false courtesy, I bring urgent news. It has come to my attention that the Queen has been meeting secretly with borderlands separatists. The room erupted. Nobles gasped, whispered, stared at Kaela with shock and accusation. They weren't secret, Kaela said clearly. They were official diplomatic meetings. With traitors seeking to destroy the kingdom, Varric countered. And rumor has it, Your Majesty supported their cause. More gasps. Ronan started to stand, but Kaela touched his arm, stopping him. This was her fight. I supported their right to fair governance, she said, standing to face Varric directly, which isn't treason, it's basic decency. The borderlands belong to the crown, Varric said. They don't have rights beyond what we grant them. They're people, Kaela shot back, not property. They're subjects. There's a difference. No, Kaela said, her voice ringing through the suddenly silent hall. There really isn't. She could feel every eye on her, feel the weight of judgment and expectation and centuries of tradition pushing back against her words. I was born in the borderlands, she continued. I grew up watching people I loved suffer because the capital didn't care if we lived or died. And now I'm queen, and I have the power to change that. So yes, I met with the delegation. Yes, I supported their petition for autonomy, and I'd do it again. Your Majesty, another noble stood. Lady Cordelia Ashmere, one of the oldest and most respected members of court. With all due respect, you don't understand the implications. I understand perfectly, Kaela interrupted. You want the borderlands to keep suffering quietly so you can keep profiting from their resources. But that's over. The corruption is exposed. The lies are out. And I'm not going to smile and pretend everything is fine. This is exactly what Kelm warned us about, Varric said triumphantly. The Queen is using the bond to manipulate the king, turning him against his own people. I am his people, Kaela's voice cracked like thunder. I'm the borderlands personified, standing right here in your precious court. And I'm telling you that if you don't start treating territories like they matter, you're going to lose them, not through manipulation, through your own cruelty and neglect. The silence that followed was absolute and electric. Then Ronan stood, moving to stand beside her. The Queen speaks for me, he said simply. The borderlands' petition for autonomy will be granted. Chaos erupted. Nobles shouted objections. Some called it treason. Others demanded Ronan reconsider. Lord Varric's face went purple with rage. Through it all, Kaela stood straight, her hand in Ronan's, facing down an entire court of people who wanted her gone. And she didn't back down. Not even when Lady Ashmere approached after the dinner, when most nobles had left in disgust, her expression unreadable. "You've made powerful enemies tonight," she said quietly. "I know. They'll try to destroy you. Varric is already calling for your removal." "Let him try." Lady Ashmere studied her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. "Good," she said. "It's about time someone shook this place up. Just be careful. The game isn't over." She walked away, leaving Kaela staring after her in confusion. "Was that support?" she asked Ronan. "I think so." He sounded as surprised as she felt. Though with Lady Ashmere, it's hard to tell. They returned to Ronan's chambers, exhausted and wired. The bond hummed between them, feeding on the adrenaline and fear and triumph of the night. "We did it," Kaela said, still not quite believing. "We actually did it." "We started it," Ronan corrected. "The real fight begins tomorrow when we draft the autonomy terms." Kaela nodded, but her mind was already racing ahead to the thousands of details that would need to be handled. Resource allocation, governance structures, defense agreements. "Kaela." Ronan's hands found her shoulders. "Stop planning for 5 minutes." "I can't. There's too much." He kissed her, cutting off her protests. The bond flared bright and overwhelming, drowning out every thought except this: him, them. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Kaela felt steadier. "We'll figure it out," Ronan said against her forehead. "Together." "Together," she agreed. But even as she said it, even as she let herself sink into his embrace and the comfort of the bond, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered warnings. They'd won today, exposed Kelm, stood up to Varric, secured promises for the borderlands. But Lady Ashmere was right. The game wasn't over. And somewhere in the palace, their enemies were already planning the next move. The assassination attempt on Ronan came at dawn, when the palace was quietest and guards were changing shifts. Kaela woke to the bond screaming danger, a spike of alarm so sharp it yanked her from sleep like a physical blow. She was on her feet and running before her mind fully caught up, barefoot and still in her nightclothes, following the pull of the connection toward Ronan's chambers. She burst through his door to find him locked in combat with two masked figures, his sword flashing in the early light. Blood streaked his shoulder. More attackers lay motionless on the floor. "Guards!" Kaela screamed even as she grabbed a decorative sword from the wall. Ornamental, but better than nothing. She didn't think, just moved on borderlands instinct, driving the blade toward the nearest attacker's back. He spun, deflecting her strike easily, and she realized with cold clarity that she was massively outmatched. These weren't common thugs. They were trained killers. But then guards poured through the door, and the attackers fled through the window with impossible speed. One paused on the ledge long enough to look back at Ronan. "Varric sends his regards," the figure said, then disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness. Silence fell, broken only by heavy breathing. Ronan lowered his sword, his eyes finding Kaela immediately. "You're bleeding," she said, her voice shaking. "It's shallow." He moved toward her, and she saw the wound was indeed minor, a graze across his shoulder. "You shouldn't have come. They could have killed you." "The bond woke me. I felt you fighting." Her hands were trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. "I couldn't just lie there knowing you were in danger." Ronan pulled her close with his uninjured arm, and she felt his heart hammering against her cheek. Through the bond, his emotions flooded her: relief, fury, fear for her safety, and underneath it all, something fierce and possessive that made her breath catch. "Varric has just declared war," he said quietly. "Sending assassins for the king isn't political maneuvering. It's treason." Captain Venn arrived moments later, her expression grim as she surveyed the bodies. "All dead. They took poison before we could capture them." "Professionals," Ronan said, "trained to die rather than talk." "Which means Varric has access to resources we didn't know about." Venn knelt beside one body, examining the tattoo on the corpse's wrist. "This marking, I've seen it before. It's from the Shadow Guild." Kaela felt Ronan go rigid. "The Shadow Guild hasn't operated in the capital for decades. They were disbanded after the Civil War. Apparently not. Ven's voice was tight, which means Varric isn't just wealthy and connected. He has access to the kingdom's most dangerous mercenaries. Then we arrest him, Kaela said. Now, before he tries again. We can't prove he sent them, Ronan said with obvious frustration. The assassin's words aren't evidence. He'll claim they were trying to frame him. So we let him keep trying to kill you? No. Ronan's expression hardened. We accelerate our timeline. The Borderlands Autonomy Agreement, we finalize it today. Make it public. Give Varric so many political fires to fight that he can't focus on assassination. That's insane, Ven said. The agreement isn't ready. The council hasn't approved. I don't need the council's approval, Ronan interrupted. I'm the king, and I'm done asking permission. Over the next 12 hours, Kaela watched Ronan transform into something she'd never seen before. Not the careful politician trying to work within the system, but a king who'd decided the system itself was the enemy. He summoned scribes and drafted the autonomy agreement himself, working with furious speed. The terms were generous, almost revolutionary. The borderlands would govern themselves, control their own resources, maintain their own defense forces. They'd remain part of the kingdom in name only, truly independent in practice. This is too much, Lord Harwin, one of the moderate nobles, protested when shown the draft. You're essentially creating a separate nation. Yes, Ronan said flatly. That's the point. The council will revolt. The treasury depends on Borderlands' resources. Then the treasury will learn to survive without theft. Ronan's patience was gone. This agreement is final. You can support it or oppose it, but either way, it's happening. Kaela stood beside him through every meeting, every negotiation, every moment when nobles tried to talk him out of what they called madness. And slowly, something remarkable happened. The Borderlands delegation, when shown the agreement, stared in disbelief. This is everything we asked for, Marcus Flint said, scanning the document. More than everything. Your Majesty, are you certain? Completely certain, Ronan said. The Borderlands have been exploited for too long. This ends it. Sarah Winterhollow's eyes filled with tears. We never expected. We thought you'd negotiate us down, force compromises. No compromises, Kaela said. You deserve full autonomy, not half measures. Why? Sarah looked between them. Why are you doing this? You're the king. You're giving away power. Because Kaela taught me something, Ronan said, glancing at her. Real power isn't about control, it's about trust. And I trust the Borderlands to govern themselves better than the capital ever could. The delegation left with the signed agreement, moving fast to spread the news before Varric could interfere. Within hours, messengers were racing toward the Borderlands territories carrying copies of the document. The revolution had begun. The council meeting that followed was the most chaotic Kaela had ever witnessed. Nobles shouted over each other, accusations flew, and at least 3 separate fights nearly broke out. This is tyranny, Varric roared, his face purple with rage. You're destroying the kingdom's economic foundation. The foundation was rotten, Kaela interrupted. She stood at the center of the chamber, refusing to be intimidated by the dozens of hostile faces surrounding her. Built on exploitation and theft. Tearing it down isn't tyranny, it's justice. You have no right to speak here, Lady Morgana Blackwood hissed. This is council business, and I'm queen, Kaela shot back, which means I have every right. You're a borderland savage playing dress-up, Varric snarled, abandoning all pretense of civility. The bond may have put a crown on your head, but it doesn't make you royal. You don't understand how power works, how kingdoms are maintained. I understand perfectly, Kaela said, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. Power is maintained through fear and control. You keep people desperate so they're easier to manipulate. You steal from territories that can't defend themselves. You hide corruption behind tradition and call cruelty necessary. She turned slowly, meeting the eyes of every noble in the chamber. But here's what you don't understand, she continued. The Borderlands aren't afraid anymore. We've survived everything you threw at us. Neglect, poverty, harsh winters, predators. We're still here, still standing, and now we have autonomy, signed and sealed, and there's nothing you can do to take it back. We can revoke it, Varric said. The council has the authority. No, Ronan said quietly, but with absolute finality. You don't. The agreement is made under royal decree. It supersedes council authority. That's not how it works. It is now. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Kaela could see nobles calculating, measuring their options, trying to find a way to undo what had been done. Then Lady Ashmere stood, and every eye turned toward her. She was old enough to remember the Civil War, powerful enough that her opinion carried weight even Varric couldn't ignore. "The king has made his decision," she said calmly, "and frankly, it's about time someone did. The borderlands have legitimate grievances. Ignoring them only breeds resentment and instability." "You support this madness?" Varric demanded. "I support practical governance," Lady Ashmere replied. "And practically speaking, we have two choices: grant autonomy peacefully, or fight a civil war we can't win. The borderlands are too large, too harsh, too familiar with survival. If they decide to resist, they'll bleed us dry." "They're farmers and hunters," someone scoffed. "Not soldiers." "They're survivors," Kaela corrected, "which makes them more dangerous than any trained army, because they know how to endure, how to outlast, how to win through sheer stubborn refusal to die." She could see understanding dawn on some faces. Others remained hostile, but the balance was shifting. Furthermore, Lady Ashmere continued, "The Queen has proven herself more capable than many of us expected. She exposed Kelm's corruption when we all turned a blind eye. She stood up to assassination attempts without cowering. She speaks uncomfortable truths we'd rather ignore." The old woman's gaze fixed on Kaela with something almost like approval. "Perhaps it's time we listened." The support was unexpected and powerful. Other moderate nobles began nodding, reconsidering their positions. Varric looked around and realized with visible fury that he was losing. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and venomous. "You think signing a document changes anything? The borderlands will fail. They'll come crawling back, begging for the capital's support. And when they do, we'll remind them exactly where they belong." "No," Kaela said, "they won't fail. Because for the first time, they'll have the resources and autonomy to succeed. And when they do, when they prove they can govern themselves better than we ever governed them, every other territory in this kingdom will be watching, learning, following their example." She saw the moment Varric understood the real threat. This wasn't just about the borderlands. It was about a complete restructuring of power throughout the kingdom. "You're destroying everything our ancestors built," he said. "Good," Ronan said simply. "Our ancestors built a system of oppression. It deserves to be destroyed." The council session ended without resolution, but the balance had shifted. Varric no longer had majority support. Lady Ashmere's backing had legitimized Kaela's position and the autonomy agreement. The revolution was taking hold. Over the following weeks, Kaela threw herself into implementation. She worked with the Borderlands delegation to establish governance structures, helped draft trade agreements, coordinated the transfer of resources and authority. The work was exhausting and constant, but for the first time since arriving in the capital, she felt like she was doing something that mattered. The bond with Ronan deepened through the process. They worked side by side, often late into the night, and the connection between them evolved beyond physical attraction or biological imperative. It became partnership, trust, something that felt dangerously close to love. "You're smiling," Ronan said one night, looking up from a stack of documents. "Am I?" Kaela touched her face, surprised to find it was true. "You are. What's that about?" "I was just thinking. When I was dragged to the selection ceremony, I thought my life was over, that I'd be trapped forever in a gilded cage, powerless and miserable. And now? Now I'm still in the cage, but I'm remaking it into something better." She met his eyes across the desk. "We're remaking it." Ronan stood and moved around the desk to pull her up into his arms. "You've changed everything, you know, not just the kingdom, me." "How?" "You made me remember why I wanted to be king in the first place. Not for power or tradition, but to actually help people." His hand came up to cup her face. "I'd forgotten that. Started playing their games, working within their systems. You reminded me that sometimes the system itself is the problem." Kaela leaned into his touch, feeling the bond hum contentedly between them. "We make a good team." "We make a terrifying team," Ronan corrected with a slight smile. "The nobles are convinced we're going to tear down the entire kingdom. Only the corrupt parts. That's what terrifies them." He kissed her then, and the bond flared bright and overwhelming. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Kaela felt something settle into place, a certainty that this was right, that they were right, that everything they were building was worth the cost. But the cost came due sooner than expected. The attack on the Borderlands delegation happened 3 weeks after the autonomy agreement was signed. They were traveling back to their territories with the finalized documents when masked riders ambushed them on the road. Marcus Flint survived by sheer luck and fighting skill. Sarah Winterhollow didn't. The news reached the palace at midnight. Kaela was with Ronan when Captain Venn delivered the report, and she felt the ground drop out from under her. "Sarah is dead?" Her voice didn't sound like her own. "Killed in the ambush, along with 2 other delegates." Venn's expression was grim. "Marcus says the attackers were professional, well-armed, organized." "Shadow Guild," Ronan said. "Almost certainly." "Varric!" Kaela's grief crystallized instantly into cold rage. "He ordered this. He's trying to start a war." "We can't prove it," Venn said. "But yes, the timing is too convenient." Kaela stood abruptly, pacing. Her mind was working through implications, through consequences, through the dozen ways this could spiral into exactly the violence she'd been trying to prevent. "The Borderlands will want revenge," she said. "Marcus and the others, they'll see this as the capital declaring war." "Can you blame them?" Ronan asked quietly. "No, but if they retaliate, Varric gets exactly what he wants. Justification for military action, an excuse to revoke the autonomy agreement and crush the Borderlands completely." She turned to face them both. "I need to go there. To the Borderlands. Talk to them before this explodes." "That's too dangerous," Ronan said immediately. "If Varric is willing to kill delegates, he won't hesitate to target you." "He's already trying to kill you," Kaela pointed out. "At least in the Borderlands, I'll be among people who actually want me alive." "She has a point," Venn said reluctantly, "and the Borderlands trust her. If anyone can keep them from retaliating, it's the Queen." Ronan was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. Through the bond, Kaela felt his conflict, the fear for her safety warring with his recognition that she was right. "I'm coming with you," he said finally. "You can't leave the capital, not with Varric actively plotting." "Then we leave him nothing to plot against." "We make the trip public," announced, "with full Royal Guard escort." Ronan's expression hardened into determination. "Let Varric try something against a king traveling with an army, and let the Borderlands see that the crown stands with them, even now." It was risky and bold and exactly the kind of gesture that might work. "Okay," Kaela said. "We go together." They left 2 days later with 100 guards, traveling the hard road toward the Borderlands territories. As they crossed from the fertile capital lands into the harsher climate Kaela knew so well, she felt something shift inside her. This was home. These were her people. The reception at the first Borderlands settlement was tense. People gathered, angry and grieving, and Kaela could see the desire for violence simmering just below the surface. Marcus Flint met them at the town center, his face haggard with exhaustion and loss. "Your Majesty," he said to Kaela, ignoring Ronan entirely. "We buried Sarah yesterday. 3 others are recovering from wounds. And you want us to do what exactly? Accept this?" "No," Kaela said, her voice ringing clear. "I want you to be smart about your anger." The crowd murmured, uncertain. "Sarah died because someone in the capital is trying to start a war," Kaela continued. "They want you to retaliate, to give them justification to march armies into your lands and crush you. Don't give them that." "So we do nothing?" a woman shouted from the crowd. "Let them murder us and smile while we die?" "You do something better than violence," Kaela said. "You succeed. You build the autonomous government we promised. You prove that the Borderlands can thrive without the capital's control. You make yourselves so strong, so prosperous, so undeniably successful that even your enemies have to acknowledge it." "That's not justice for Sarah," Marcus said quietly. "No," Kaela agreed, and her voice broke slightly. "It's not. But Sarah didn't die for revenge. She died fighting for a better future. Honor that. Make the future she wanted real." Silence fell. Kaela could see people struggling with grief and rage and the hard truth of her words. Then Ronan stepped forward. I am the king who failed you, he said, his voice carrying through the square. I inherited a corrupt system and spent years trying to fix it from within instead of tearing it down. That cowardice cost lives, cost Sarah's life, and I will carry that guilt forever. The crowd stirred, surprised by his candor. But the queen is right, Ronan continued. The people who killed your delegates want chaos, want war, want an excuse to destroy everything we've built. Don't give it to them. Instead, build your government, elect your leaders, control your resources, and when you're strong enough, when you're undeniable, then you can demand justice. Real justice, not revenge. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, then finally nodded. We'll hold elections next month, choose our first autonomous council. And we'll attend, Kaela said, as witnesses and allies, not rulers. That night, in a borderlands inn that reminded Kaela painfully of home, she and Ronan sat by the fire talking with Marcus about the future, about governance structures and trade agreements and the 1,000 practical details of building something new. You know they still hate you in the capital, Marcus said to Ronan, halfway through his third drink. The nobles. They think you're weak for listening to a borderlands queen. Let them think that, Ronan said. Their opinion stopped mattering the moment I realized the bond chose better than I ever could have. Marcus studied them both, then smiled slightly. Sarah would have liked this. She always said the bond was smarter than people gave it credit for. Tell me about her, Kaela said softly. I want to know who we lost. Marcus did. He talked for hours about Sarah Winterhollow, her sharp wit, her fiercer heart, her absolute refusal to accept injustice. And Kaela listened, memorizing every detail, carrying the weight of this loss like she'd carried so many others from the borderlands. When they returned to the capital a week later, the political landscape had shifted again. News of the royal visit to the borderlands had spread. People had seen their king standing among the survivors, acknowledging failure, promising change. Lady Ashmere met them at the palace gates, her expression unreadable. You've started something you can't control, she said without preamble. Good, Kaela replied. 3 more territories have submitted autonomy petitions. The merchant guilds are demanding representation in council. Even the capital's common citizens are organizing, asking for voice in governance. Lady Ashmere's eyes gleamed. You've awakened something that's been sleeping for decades. Revolution, Ronan said quietly. Evolution, Lady Ashmere corrected. The kingdom is changing whether we want it to or not. The question is whether we guide that change or get crushed by it. You're supporting this? Kaela asked, still not quite believing it. I'm supporting survival, the old woman said, and I'm old enough to recognize when the tide has turned. Varric and his faction are fighting to preserve a dying system. You two are building something new. She paused. I know which side wins that fight. What about Varric? Ronan asked. He's not going to accept defeat. No, Lady Ashmere agreed. Which is why I'm telling you this. He's planning something for the Borderlands elections next month. Something big enough to derail everything you've built. What? Kaela felt ice in her stomach. I don't know yet, but be ready. And be careful. Desperate men make dangerous choices. She left them with that warning, and Kaela felt the brief moment of victory fade into renewed tension. We should cancel the elections, Ronan said. Postpone until we know what Varric is planning. No, Kaela interrupted. If we cancel, we look weak. Worse, we prove Varric right, that the Borderlands can't govern themselves, that they need the capital's control. But if he succeeds, then we stop him. Kaela's voice was steel. We've beaten him before. We'll do it again. The month leading up to the elections was tense with anticipation. Kaela coordinated with Captain Venn to increase security, positioned loyal guards throughout the Borderlands, and worked with Marcus to ensure the election process was transparent and fair. But she couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something, that Varric's plan was hiding in plain sight, waiting to strike. The elections took place on a clear autumn day, in town squares throughout the Borderlands territories. Kaela and Ronan attended as promised, watching as people who'd never had political voice before cast votes for their first autonomous council. It was beautiful and historic and terrifying, because Kaela kept waiting for the attack that never came. The results were counted, verified, announced. The Borderlands had their first elected government, leaders who'd actually lived there, who understood the harsh reality, who would govern with their people's interests in mind. And still, nothing happened. It wasn't until they returned to the capital, until the celebrations had died down and normal governance resumed, that Varric made his move. He called for a vote of no confidence in the king. The council chamber filled with nobles as Varric laid out his case. Ronan had exceeded his authority, granted too much autonomy, weakened the kingdom's economic foundation, been manipulated by a foreign queen who didn't understand proper governance. The bond has compromised his judgment, Varric declared. He no longer acts in the kingdom's best interest, only in service to his mate's borderlands agenda. It was a coordinated attack, carefully planned. Nobles Varric had been cultivating stood to support him. Arguments were made about tradition, about stability, about the danger of change. Kaela watched it unfold with growing understanding. This was Varric's real plan, not violence or sabotage, but politics. Remove Ronan legally, install someone more controllable, and undo everything they'd built. When Ronan stood to defend himself, his voice was calm, but his expression was dangerous. Lord Varric accuses me of being compromised by the bond, he said, of putting my queen before my kingdom. He's wrong about one thing, it's not before. It's together. He turned to face the assembled nobles. Kaela didn't compromise my judgment. She clarified it. She helped me see that the kingdom I thought I was protecting was actually a prison for most of its people, that the stability we praised was built on suffering we chose to ignore. Precisely my point, Varric interrupted. She's made you weak. No. Ronan's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. She's made me honest, and honesty is what this kingdom desperately needs. He gestured to Captain Van, who stepped forward carrying another folder. Since we're questioning judgment, Ronan said, let's examine yours, Lord Varric. Captain? Van opened the folder. We've been investigating Lord Varric's finances since the Borderlands delegation attack. We found evidence linking him to the Shadow Guild. Payments, messages, proof that he ordered the assassination. The chamber erupted. Varric's face went white, then red. This is fabrication, another attempt to silence opposition. We have your signature on payment orders, Ven continued relentlessly. Testimony from guild members in exchange for clemency. And we have this. She held up a sealed letter, breaking the wax to read aloud. It was Varric's own handwriting, ordering the death of anyone who threatened to expose his connection to the guild. The silence that followed was absolute. You murdered Sarah Winterhollow, Kaela said, her voice shaking with fury. And you're standing here accusing us of poor judgment? Varric looked around the chamber, seeing his support crumbling, seeing the trap close around him. His hand moved toward his sword. Don't, Ronan said quietly. You'll die before you draw it. Guards moved into position. Varric was surrounded, his options gone. You think this changes anything? He laughed bitterly. Remove me, arrest me, execute me. It won't matter. The system is bigger than one man. Corruption will continue because that's what power does. It corrupts. And you two idealistic fools will learn that eventually. Maybe, Kaela said, or maybe we'll prove you wrong. Build something better. Something that doesn't require good people to become monsters just to survive. Naive, Varric spat, just like I always said. Perhaps, Lady Ashmere said, standing. But I'd rather be naive and hopeful than cynical and cruel. Take him away. Guards dragged Varric out as he screamed threats and accusations. When the doors closed behind him, the chamber remained silent. Then Lady Ashmere turned to the assembled nobles. The vote of no confidence is withdrawn, she said, unless anyone else wishes to challenge the king's judgment. No one spoke. Then I move that we officially recognize the Borderlands autonomous government and extend the same opportunity to any territory that wishes to petition for self-governance. The motion passed with surprising ease. Not unanimous, some nobles still resisted, but enough to make it official. The revolution had won. That night, alone in their chambers, Kaela and Ronan stood at the window looking out over the capital. Lights flickered in windows throughout the city, and somewhere in the distance they could hear celebration. We did it, Kaela said softly. We actually did it. We started it, Ronan corrected, echoing her words from weeks ago. The real work begins now, building governance structures, managing transition, handling territories that want autonomy. Handling nobles who still hate us, Kaela added. That too. She leaned against him, feeling the bond settle warm and content between them. Do you regret it? Choosing me? Starting this whole mess? Never, Ronan said immediately. He turned her to face him. The bond knew what it was doing. It chose someone strong enough to change everything. Someone brave enough to challenge a broken system. Someone who reminded me what actually matters. What matters? People. Truth. Justice. He smiled slightly. You. Kaela kissed him, and the bond flared between them, not just physical attraction or biological imperative, but something deeper. Partnership, trust, love that had been forged through fire and conflict and choosing each other over and over again. When they finally broke apart, Kaela felt something she hadn't felt since arriving in the capital. Hope. Real, genuine hope that they were building something worth believing in. Real hope, Kaela learned over the following months, was harder to maintain than she'd expected. The immediate victory over Varric had been satisfying but incomplete. His arrest exposed a network of corruption that ran deeper than anyone anticipated. Dozens of nobles implicated, entire departments compromised, systems of bribery and control that had operated for generations. Untangling it all while maintaining basic governance was like trying to rebuild a ship while it was still sailing through a storm. But they did it. Piece by piece, day by grinding day. Kaela threw herself into the work with the same intensity she'd once used to survive borderlands winters. She helped draft new laws, oversaw the establishment of territorial councils, mediated disputes between the capital and newly autonomous regions. The bond with Ronan became their greatest asset. They could coordinate without speaking, sense each other's exhaustion, share the burden in ways no previous rulers had been able to. 3 months after Varric's arrest, the first autonomous territories reported their harvest yields. The numbers were staggering, 30% higher than previous years. Without the capital siphoning resources, without corrupt officials taking their cut, the borderlands were thriving. They're calling it the autonomy miracle, Captain Venn reported during a morning briefing. Territories across the kingdom are submitting petitions. Even some capital provinces want self-governance. Let them have it, Ronan said. He looked tired. They both did, but his voice was certain. Every territory that wants autonomy should get it. The Treasury can't sustain that, Lord Harwin protested. He was one of the moderate nobles who'd survived the corruption purge, but even he balked at the pace of change. We depend on territorial revenues. Then we adjust, Kaela interrupted. Create fair trade agreements instead of extraction. Build partnerships instead of dependencies. The old system is dead. We need to stop mourning it and start building something better. Lord Harwin sighed, but nodded. The council meets this afternoon to vote on the latest petitions. I assume you'll both attend? Wouldn't miss it, Ronan said dryly. The council chamber had changed dramatically since Kelm's fall. Half the seats were now filled by elected representatives from autonomous territories instead of hereditary nobles. The shift in power was visible and irreversible. Lady Ashmere presided over the session with the calm authority of someone who'd navigated 3 regime changes and come out stronger each time. She'd become an unexpected ally, using her influence to push through reforms that even Kaela had thought impossible. The petitions from the Western Highlands and the Southern Coast are approved, she announced after the vote. That brings us to 17 autonomous territories total. Captain Venn, please coordinate with their delegations regarding transition logistics. Yes, my lady. And now, Lady Ashmere continued, we have more difficult business. The question of succession. The chamber went quiet. Kaela felt Ronan tense beside her. Your Majesty, Lady Ashmere said, addressing them both, you've been married 6 months. The bond is stable. The kingdom is transforming. But you have no heir, and in uncertain times that creates complications. You want us to have a child, Kaela said flatly, for political stability. I want you to consider it, Lady Ashmere corrected. A child born of the bond, raised in this new system you're building, it would symbolize everything you've accomplished. Give people hope for the future. Kaela and Ronan exchanged a look. They'd discussed this privately, late at night when exhaustion made them honest. Both wanted children eventually. But the timing felt wrong, the pressure unwelcome. We'll consider it, Ronan said carefully. But that's a private decision, not a political one. In your position, everything is political, Lord Harwin said. Like it or not. Then we'll have to learn to live with people not liking it, Kaela replied. Because some things stay private, even for kings and queens. The session continued, but Kaela's mind was elsewhere, thinking about children and futures and the weight of building something worth passing on. She'd come so far from the blindfolded girl in the stone hall, terrified and angry and certain she was being sacrificed to a system that didn't care if she lived or died. Now she was helping remake that system entirely. The irony wasn't lost on her. That evening, in the quiet of Ronan's study, which had become their study somewhere along the way, Kaela reviewed reports from the borderlands territories. Marcus Flint had been elected to the regional council and was sending regular updates. His letters always included personal notes, stories about Sarah Winterhollow's legacy, reminders of what they were fighting for. You're smiling again, Ronan observed, looking up from his own stack of documents. Marcus says they're building a school in Sarah's name. Free education for all borderlands children. That's perfect. Ronan set down his pen and moved to read over her shoulder. She would have loved that. She would have demanded 10 schools, Kaela corrected. But yes. His arms wrapped around her from behind, and she leaned into his warmth. The bond hummed contentedly between them, no longer the overwhelming force it had been at first, but a steady presence, comfort, connection, home. I've been thinking about what Lady Ashmere said, Ronan murmured against her hair, about succession, about the future. And I want that future, with you. Children who grow up knowing their parents chose each other, who see governance as service instead of control, who never have to stand blindfolded waiting to be chosen. Kaela turned in his arms to face him. That's a beautiful vision. But I'm terrified, she admitted. What if we fail? What if the system we're building collapses? What if our children inherit chaos instead of hope? Then we'll have raised them to survive chaos, Ronan said. You did. The borderlands made you strong enough to change a kingdom. Our children will be strong too. You make it sound so simple. It's not simple. Nothing about us is simple. He smiled slightly. But it's right. And you taught me that sometimes right is worth the risk. Kaela kissed him, and the bond flared warm and certain. When they broke apart, she realized the fear was still there, but so was hope. And maybe that was enough. The crisis came 2 weeks later, sudden and devastating. A plague swept through the southern coast territory, one of the newly autonomous regions. It spread fast, killing indiscriminately, and the local government was overwhelmed. They sent desperate requests for help, for medical supplies, for anything the capital could provide. The council's response was immediate division. We can't afford to help every territory that faces crisis, Lord Harwin argued. Our resources are already stretched thin. If we bail them out now, we set a precedent. People are dying, Kaela interrupted, her voice sharp. That's not a precedent. That's a catastrophe that requires action. The territory is autonomous, another noble pointed out. They wanted independence. Let them handle their own problems. Kaela felt rage rising, hot and absolute. Autonomy doesn't mean abandonment. They're still part of this kingdom. Are they? The question came from Lord Brennan, a traditionalist who'd never supported the reforms. They govern themselves, control their own resources, maintain their own defense. They're autonomous in everything but name, so why should the capital bear responsibility for their failures? Because that's what community means, Kaela shot back. Autonomy doesn't erase obligation. It redistributes it. The argument continued, voices rising, positions hardening. Kaela looked to Ronan and saw him calculating, weighing political cost against moral imperative. We help them, he said finally. Send medical supplies, healers, whatever they need. Your Majesty, Lord Harwin started. No debate, Ronan cut him off. The southern coast is suffering. We have resources they need. We help. End of discussion. But it wasn't the end. Over the following week, as supplies were gathered and healers dispatched, opposition grew. Nobles complained about cost. Traditional territories resented autonomous regions receiving aid. Even some newly autonomous territories worried that accepting help would undermine their independence. Kaela watched the coalition she'd worked so hard to build begin to fracture, and she felt something close to despair. Maybe Varric was right, she said one night, staring at reports of continued division. Maybe I was naive to think we could build something better. You weren't naive, Ronan said. He looked as exhausted as she felt. You were hopeful. There's a difference. Hope doesn't stop people from dying of plague. Hope doesn't prevent political collapse. No, but action does. He took her hand. We sent help. We did the right thing. If that costs us politically, so be it. Easy for you to say. You were born to this. I'm still the borderland savage playing dress-up, according to half the court. Then let them think that. Ronan pulled her closer. Let them underestimate you right up until the moment you prove them catastrophically wrong. Again. Despite everything, Kaela smiled. You have a lot of faith in me. The bond chose well, he said simply. I'm just smart enough to recognize it. The turning point came from an unexpected source. A delegation arrived from the southern coast, led by a woman named Elena Stormbreak, who'd lost her entire family to the plague. She requested an audience with the council, and Lady Ashmere granted it despite protests. Elena stood in the center of the council chamber, her clothes still bearing stains from nursing the sick, her eyes hollow with grief but burning with determination. I came to thank you, she said, her voice carrying through the silent room. The supplies you sent saved hundreds of lives. My neighbors, my friends, people who would have died if the capital had turned its back on us. You're welcome, Kaela said quietly. We're sorry for your losses. Don't be sorry, Elena said. Be proud. Because what you did, sending help when you didn't have to, supporting autonomy without abandoning responsibility, that's what real governance looks like. That's what we hoped for when we petitioned for self-rule. She turned to address the full chamber. Some of you think autonomy was a mistake, that we're too weak, too unprepared to govern ourselves. And maybe you're right. Maybe we'll fail sometimes. Maybe we'll need help. But the alternative, staying dependent, staying trapped in a system that steals from us while pretending to protect us, that's not safety. That's slow death. The nobles shifted uncomfortably. Elena's words were cutting through their objections, exposing the truth they'd been avoiding. The queen understands this, Elena continued, looking directly at Kaela, because she lived it. She survived the borderlands not by accepting scraps from the capital, but by building community, by helping her neighbors even when she barely had enough for herself. That's the model we're trying to follow. Autonomous but connected. Independent but not isolated. Beautiful words, Lord Brennan said dismissively. But the reality is that autonomous territories will constantly need bailouts. You'll drain the treasury dry. Then change the treasury model, Elena shot back. Stop treating territories like revenue sources and start treating them like partners. Fair trade, fair compensation, fair voice in governance. That's what we're asking for. And if you can't provide that, then yes, we'll continue pushing for full independence, because anything is better than exploitation. The silence that followed was electric. Kaela felt something shift in the chamber. Not everyone was convinced, but Elena had planted seeds of doubt in the opposition's certainty. The Southern Coast thanks you for your aid, Elena said formally, and we pledge to return the favor when the capital faces crisis. Because that's what partnership means. She left with dignity, and the council erupted into argument. But Kaela noticed something. The arguments were different now. Not about whether to support autonomy, but about how to make it work sustainably. The conversation had shifted. Over the following months, Elena's model took hold. Autonomous territories began forming mutual aid agreements, helping each other during crises, sharing resources, building networks of support that didn't depend on the capital's approval. The system Kaela had envisioned was emerging organically, territory by territory, partnership by partnership. And slowly, the opposition in the capital began to crumble. Lord Brennan was the first to publicly reverse his position, announcing that his province would petition for autonomy to better serve local needs. Others followed. Within 6 months, more than half the kingdom had transitioned to autonomous governance. The revolution was complete. The final council session of the year was different from any that had come before. The chamber was packed with representatives from territories across the kingdom, elected leaders, not hereditary nobles. The old guard was still present, but they were clearly outnumbered. Lady Ashmere called the session to order with visible satisfaction. We gather today to formalize what has already become reality, she announced. The Kingdom of Varric is no longer a centralized monarchy. It is a federation of autonomous territories, united by choice rather than force. She gestured to where Kaela and Ronan sat side by side. And we owe this transformation to two people who refused to accept a broken system, who chose partnership over control, truth over tradition, and justice over convenience. The chamber erupted in applause. Not unanimous, some nobles still looked bitter, but overwhelming. Kaela felt tears threatening and forced them back. She'd survived the borderlands. She could survive being publicly honored without crying. Probably. The Federation Charter is ready for signing, Lady Ashmere continued. It establishes the framework we've been building. Territorial autonomy with federal coordination, fair trade agreements, mutual defense obligations, and equal representation in governance. She held up the document, and Kaela saw that it was beautiful, written on parchment, bound in leather, marked with the seals of every territory. Your Majesty, Lady Ashmere said to Ronan, will you sign? Ronan stood, moving to the table where the charter lay. He picked up the ceremonial pen, then paused and looked back at Kaela. Come here, he said. Kaela rose, confused. This is your moment. It's our moment, Ronan interrupted. You built this as much as I did. More, maybe. Sign with me. The chamber stirred with surprise. Joint signatures on formal documents were rare, reserved for treaties and marriage contracts. But Ronan was holding out the pen with absolute certainty. Kaela moved to stand beside him. Together, they signed the Federation Charter, his name and hers side by side, making official what they'd been building all along. Partnership, equality, choice. The applause this time was deafening. That night, in the quiet after celebration had faded, Kaela stood in the courtyard where she'd first arrived at the palace. She could still remember that day, terrified and angry, blindfolded and waiting to be chosen, certain her life was ending. She'd been wrong. Her life had been beginning. Ronan found her there, moving to stand beside her in comfortable silence. The bond hummed between them, warm and steady. What are you thinking? He asked. That I should thank whoever invented the selection ceremony, Kaela said. Even though it was horrible and wrong, and we've abolished it entirely, why thank them? Because without it, I never would have met you, never would have felt the bond, never would have realized I could change things instead of just surviving them. Ronan pulled her close. The bond knew what it was doing. Did it? Or did we just get lucky? Does it matter? His hand found hers, fingers interlacing. We're here now. We built something worth believing in. And we're just getting started. Kaela thought about that, about the future spreading before them like uncharted territory, autonomous regions to support, trade agreements to negotiate, probably more crises to handle. And yes, eventually, children to raise in a kingdom that looked nothing like the one she'd first entered. It was terrifying and overwhelming and absolutely right. Marcus sent another letter, she said. The Borderlands Council wants to establish a joint initiative, combining traditional survival knowledge with new educational programs. They're calling it the Sarah Winterhollow Institute. Perfect. Ronan's voice was warm with approval. What else? Elena from the southern coast is proposing a federation-wide medical network, shared resources, coordinated response to health crises. Kaela smiled. She's basically building mutual aid on a massive scale. Also perfect. And Lady Ashmere asked if we'd attend the Northern Territory's autonomy celebration next month. She says there will be at least 300 people, all wanting to thank us personally. 300? Ronan groaned. That sounds exhausting. It does, Kaela agreed. But we'll go anyway, because that's what this job is now. Showing up, listening, supporting people who are building their own futures. When you put it that way, it sounds almost bearable. They stood together in the courtyard, looking up at the palace that had once felt like a prison and now felt like home. Not because it had changed, though it had extensively, but because they had changed, grown into their roles, grown into each other. I love you, Ronan said quietly, not through the bond, though she felt it echo there, just words, spoken into the night. Kaela turned to face him fully. I know. I've known since you removed my blindfold and looked at me like I mattered. You did matter. You do matter. I know that too now, she smiled. Took a while to believe it, but I got there. What changed? You. This. She gestured at the palace, the kingdom beyond, realizing that mattering isn't about status or bloodline or whether you were born in the capital or the borderlands. It's about what you do, how you treat people, whether you choose justice over comfort. Very philosophical for someone who once told me she just wanted to survive. I've evolved. Kaela grinned. Blame the bond, or the crown, or the fact that you keep pushing me to be better than I thought I could be. I don't push. I just recognize what's already there. They kissed, and the bond flared between them, familiar now, but no less powerful. When they broke apart, Kaela felt settled in a way she'd never experienced before. Not just content, not just happy, but certain. This was right. They were right. Everything they'd built together was right. Come on, Ronan said, taking her hand. It's late, and we have another brutal council session tomorrow. Autonomous territories requesting Federation membership? 3 of them. Plus Elena's medical network proposal, plus the Borderlands education initiative, plus whatever crisis inevitably emerges between now and morning. Sounds perfect, Kaela said, and meant it. They walked back toward the palace together, hand in hand, leaving the courtyard behind. Behind them, the space where 23 blindfolded women had once stood waiting to be chosen remained empty. Silent. A monument to a system that no longer existed. No more blindfolds, no more forced selections. No more pretending control was protection or exploitation was tradition. Just choice. Hard, terrifying, beautiful choice. And Kaela Thornridge, the Borderlands survivor who'd refused to feel small, who'd stood chin up in front of predators and survived, who'd helped tear down a corrupt system and build something better in its place. She chose to keep building. Every single day, she chose it. The kingdom had changed. She had changed. The bond that had once seemed like a trap had become the foundation for transformation neither of them could have imagined. And somewhere in the Borderlands, in a school bearing Sarah Winterhollow's name, children were learning that they didn't have to accept the world as it was, that they could change it, that one person's courage could start a revolution, that even blind, you could see the truth. And once you saw it, you could never go back. Kaela smiled as they entered the palace, Ronan's hand warm in hers, the bond steady between them. The future was uncertain and challenging and full of work that would never truly be finished. But for the first time since that terrifying day in the stone hall, she wasn't afraid of it. She was ready. They both were. And together, they would keep building a kingdom where no one had to stand blindfolded, waiting for someone else to choose their fate. A kingdom where everyone could look up, see clearly, and choose for themselves. No more blindfolds. Only choice. Only truth. Only the future they were brave enough to create.